Hello there and welcome to the Coffee with Colin, and thank you for joining me. This is week 4 in our 4-part mini-series around self-care under the umbrella of POYOOMF, put on your own oxygen mask first. And week 1 we spoke about health, week 2 we spoke about wealth, last week we spoke about relationships, and this week we're going to speak about spirit, because they're the 4 pillars, if you like, that rest underneath a balanced life of self-care for you and for I. So health, wealth, relationships and spirit. Today we're going to talk about spirit. And the first distinction I want to make, if I may, is the distinction between spirit and religion. I'm in my mid-50s. I was born in Dublin in 1963, and as a result I'm Catholic. Quelle surprise, right? I was born into a Catholic family, and by the way, I was delighted to be born into a Catholic family. But you know, I remember reading as a kid on the side of a school book, a second-hand school book that I had. Somebody had written before me. Somebody had written, "Don't let schooling interfere with your education." Great line. Don't let schooling interfere with your education. And by the same token, don't let religion interfere with your relationship with God. So I was born into a Catholic family, and very happy to have been so. And for many years I was practicing Catholic, and a devout practicing Catholic. I remember meeting a man from the north of Ireland, and something came up about religion, and I mentioned that I was a practicing Catholic, and he said, well, if you keep practicing, someday you could be good enough to be a Protestant. Anyway, let's not mix up spirit and religion. Any of us that consider ourselves as seekers of a higher spiritual awareness sometimes refer to ourselves as physical beings who are seeking a spiritual experience. But in fact, what if you and I are in fact spiritual beings having a temporary physical experience? Doesn't that change things? What if you and I are in fact spiritual beings experiencing a temporary physical experience? I think that's very interesting. You see, at a subatomic level, we're all made of the same stuff. And the grass out there, and the water out there, and the trees out there, and the wall here, all made of the same stuff at a deep subatomic level. You see, everything that's physical in this world is made up of cells, and cells are made up of atoms. And atoms are largely nothing. Atoms are protons and neutrons in the center, forming a nucleus, around which is a cloud of activity, a cloud of electrons, and the electrons are spinning outside of the nucleus, because the protons and neutrons are repelling it the whole time. So if you imagine, just by way of example, you're standing in the middle of Croke Park, and you're the nucleus, the electron cloud is flying around you, but it's out there in the stands, and the gap between you as the nucleus and the stands is fundamentally the gap between any nucleus in any atom and the electron cloud around that atom anywhere. So largely that's made up of void space, so therefore largely you and I are made up of nothing, and the same nothing is what's making up everything else out there. We've got to try and get our heads around that. And if that's the case, well then you and I are connected to absolutely everything. The human body is miraculous. The human body is miraculous. It starts off as one cell, and at conception divides into 2, and then divides into 4, and then divides into 8, and then divides into 16, and so on, until there are trillions of cells making up your body and making up mine. But the miraculous part is that the single cell where it all began divided and divided and divided, and then divided into different types of cells. That's really interesting, right? The intelligence within the cell divided into different types of cells. So we've got heart cells, we've got hair cells, we've got eye cells, we've got tongue cells, teeth cells, okay? All started from that one single cell at the beginning, and then miraculously divided and divided and divided and changed. But there's a central intelligence, if you like, that's controlling it all. I'm reading one of Deepak Chopra's books at the moment called Synchrodestiny, and in it he talks about the ocean by way of an analogy. He talks about the ocean. The ocean spans the world, and all the oceans, all the 7 oceans of the world basically are one large ocean. There's nothing dividing them. They're all interconnected. So it's all the same stuff. And he refers to that as the non-local domain, if you like, the global domain or the non-local domain. And then you take a wave on a shore somewhere, and that wave is, if you like, just a local interruption in that flow, a local interruption in that flow. But there's no difference between the local interruption in that flow and the flow itself. No difference between the wave and the ocean. They're just different formats of exactly the same thing. And he proposes that you and I are the same. We're simply a local disruption, for want of a term, for want of my very poor term. We're a local disruption in the overall scheme of things, in the overall universal soup that's out there. It's certainly worth considering. Think of a shoal of fish. You've often seen it, I'm sure, on David Attenborough's wonderful programs, where a shoal of fish seems to move in unison. There's nobody guiding it, but they seem to move in unison. And Deepak Chopra is suggesting that that's a higher intelligence that's at work at a subatomic level. You've perhaps seen a murmuration of starlings. One of nature's most beautiful sights, a murmuration of starlings, where again they move in unison. Nobody's directing, nobody's leading, they just move in unison. What's that about? There's got to be something going on under the surface to allow that to happen so beautifully, so majestically. So what all of this is proposing is that you and I, at a very deep, subatomic level, you and I are connected to everything else in the world and connected to everyone else on the world. And therefore, everything that you and I do has a ripple effect out there in the universe. Everything that you and I do and everything that everybody else does has a ripple effect out there in the universe. And so if you and I want to change the world, well, then we have to change our own world first. If you and I want to change the world, we've got to change our own world first. And how do we change our own world? First thing we got to do is we got to get in touch with it. We got to get in touch with our own world. So if we were to consider, you and I, just for a moment, that we are in fact spiritual beings having a temporary physical experience, well then wouldn't it make sense for us to spend a little more time getting in touch with that very self-same spirit? I think so. And how are we going to do that? Because the reality is the world would have us distracted, noise and distraction everywhere. The world would have us distracted. So how are we going to do that? I have to tell you, there's going to be work associated with this. You and I are going to have to find a way of carving out some time to get in touch with our spirit. And how are you going to do it? Well, perhaps it's through reading. Perhaps it's through walking in nature. You've done it before, I'm sure. You've walked in nature before and you've felt replenished. Is that just an accident? No, it's not just an accident. You know it's not just an accident. There's something going on at a subatomic level when you and I walk by water, we walk in a forest, we climb a mountain. There's something going on that makes us feel better within ourselves. There has to be something in that. So how are we going to do it on a more regular basis? I recommend a couple of things. I recommend we spend a little more quiet time. I recommend we spend a little more time reading. And what type of stuff we're going to read? Well, it's up to you what you decide you want to read, but read something that's going to challenge the grey matter in here for sure. Read something that's going to add to your spiritual journey for sure, whatever that might be. For what it's worth, I read the Bible every day. Okay? I don't push it down people's throats, but I read the Bible every day. I'm also happy to be reading Deepak Chopra every day. I don't see any conflict at all between those two ways of looking at the world. And another practice that I reckon you and I need to consider and perhaps engage in more often, and that is some meditation. We got to figure out a way of getting ourselves calm, getting ourselves quiet, getting ourselves still, so that we can actually hear that small, still voice that's alluded to. We can actually hear the voice of God in our lives by quietening ourselves down, so that we give ourselves some opportunity of being able to catch the whispers. And I spoke in week 1 of this program of my own attempts at meditation. I'm not an expert in anything, folks. I just do what I do, and then I think out loud. I put it out there for you to consider. And I'm hopeful that something that I say across all my ruminations is going to impact somebody out there. I have no idea who that person might be. It might be you. And nudge you towards a particular course of action that will have a long-term impact, long-term positive impact on your life, and therefore on the world around you. That's my hope and prayer, if you like, for the type of work that I'm doing. And as ever, in conclusion, we're asking the 2 questions, the big rock question and the one thing question. So the big rock question: what is the big rock for you around this conversation? Figure it out for yourself. What's the big rock? What's the most important thing that you need to do, that you know you need to do? Figure that out and write it down. And then the second question, the one thing question, is based on that big rock, based on what you know you need to do, what one thing can you do this week that'll have the biggest positive impact on that big rock that you've identified? What one thing can you do this week that will have the biggest positive impact on that big rock that you've identified? And I'm going to finish, if I may, by reading an anonymous piece. Came across it somewhere over the years, put it in my diary, and I read it every single week. Let me finish on this, if I may. It says, "Much as we hate to admit it, we're shepherdless sheep, born out of one eternity and frighteningly close to another. We can't answer our own questions about love and hurt. We can't solve the riddle of aging. We don't know how to heal our own bodies or get along with our mates. My point is, uncontrolled anger won't better our world. Sympathetic understanding will. Once we begin to operate not from a posture of anger but of compassion, we realize the lights are out. A lot of people are stumbling around in the darkness, so we light candles. And that's what I'd like to think I'm doing in this series around self-care under the umbrella of POYOOMF. And that is that I'm lighting candles for you, and I'm hoping that some of you out there are going to take that candle, look after yourself first, and then when you're ready, you're going to go and light candles for others. And thank you for joining me for this week's Coffee with Colm. I hope and trust as ever that you got something from it. If you have done, you think somebody else would benefit, I'd be delighted if you'd pass the link on. If it's your first time here and you like more of this type of stuff, well then go to the homepage, ColmO'BrienMotivation.com. Leave me some details. I'll make sure you get a link like this every week. Most importantly, please consider what's been shared here today and apply it into your thinking for this next week. And equally as importantly, please come back next week and we'll share another coffee together and I'll ruminate on some other aspect of life and business. Between now and then, get some good coffee for sure, get some fresh air for sure. If you spend a lot of time alone, I recommend you go meet some people. Conversely, if you spend a lot of time with people, I recommend you spend some time alone. And then when the time is right, and only when the time is right, get your head back in the game, get organised for the week ahead, get stuck in, make next week count, and I'll see you here this time next week for another Coffee with Colm. Sláinte. I really love great coffee. Talk to you soon. Bye for now.